Okay, I think we're good.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sissy Trinh. I'm the Executive Director of SPARCC, the Southeast Asian Community Alliance. And we are a youth organizing group that basically works with high school students in Chinatown and Northeast LA. So think of it as Chinatown is the right side of your photo, and then Lincoln Heights is the left side. For us, you know, the neighborhoods we work in are some of the lowest income in the community or in the city of LA. Median household income is around $22,000 for a family. And a lot of our families are at risk of homelessness. In the midst of all of this was the city's efforts to put in $1.6 billion of public investments in the form of the LA River. And you know, they were touting it as a way to get a local supply of water, increasing climate resilience, and making us a world-class city. Now, take into context, again, some of the lowest income neighborhoods, we're also dealing with a homelessness crisis. And a lot of it is really being driven by evictions and rising rents. So our latest homelessness count actually saw that 65% of the homeless folks from this past year were first-time homeless folks. You know, again, driven by rising rents and evictions. And so what we were seeing on the park side was a lot of our colleagues getting a lot of resistance when they would come in and try and build parks, right? Or even just do something as simple as park cleanups. People were saying, we don't want a park because it's gonna raise rents and we're gonna get pushed out and we're gonna end up becoming homeless. For us as an organization, we didn't wanna be put in that position of, do we choose a healthy community or an affordable home? You know, that's kind of a Sophie's choice, and we felt like there has to be some other way. And so that's kind of the impetus for creating La Rosa, the LA Regional Open Space and Affordable Housing Collaborative. And it's really a partnership between local nonprofits, regional, national, and then government agencies. We're a coalition of about, I think, over a dozen different organizations. And so we came together really to directly address the issue of green gentrification. How do we build parks? How do we build open spaces? And how do we not just stabilize, but improve and uplift low-income communities? And so we have a couple of different strategies. We have a policy team that's working on embedding displacement avoidance policies in green infrastructure projects, whether it's the financing side through infrastructure bonds or brick and mortar projects like an individual park or high-speed rail or the LA River. The other is really how do we build, how do we think about parks in a different way? And so the key strategy that we're looking at is the joint development of parks and affordable housing, kind of taking on the whole experience that we've learned through transit-oriented developments. And a lot of that's been capacity building, trying to learn from each other, the different languages we use and the different processes for building parks and building housing, and how we can come together and do it jointly, and not just on a project by project basis, but how do we build systems in place so that we can make sure that these projects happen repeatedly. So I'm going to hand it off to Tori.
Great, thanks, Sissy. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Tori Kjer, I'm the Executive Director of the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust, and we are a local Los Angeles-based nonprofit that was founded in 2002 to address Los Angeles' park inequities. And we do this by building parks and gardens and working towards policy change and really supporting a lot of the work that Sissy talked about, and work with many of the partners around this table to do that. So I'm going to provide a little bit of a background on the LA County Needs Assessment and some public funding that we have here in Los Angeles to support the development of parks and gardens and really help to create access. And I'm going to just start quickly by saying that Los Angeles County as a whole is extremely park poor. Just about 50% of LA County residents can walk to a park. But if you look at low-income communities of color, it's more like 90% of residents with low-income communities of color actually cannot walk to a park. So the distribution of parks and park resources is really a reflection of the racist planning and zoning and policies that have been in place for decades and have really ultimately impacted the health and well-being of communities of color throughout Los Angeles County. So we have significant park equity and access issues. We are LA County is more populous than 42 states in the country. So we are an extremely large, very populated county with very little park access in the communities that need it most. And one of the ways that, the county has been working to address this is through funding. And there has been funding in place to really support park access, but it's a complicated county and the funding a couple years ago was running out. So in order to really figure out how to create a new stream of funding and really how to identify need, the LA County supervisors direct county parks to develop a needs assessment. I think it's actually a pretty significant needs assessment process. I think groundbreaking in many ways in terms of the size of the county. They inventoried 3,000 parks across the county, looking at the parks from a range of conditions, how people can actually access those parks, what type of amenities were in the park, are they meeting the needs of the communities, and what kind of condition are they in? And they developed a category called park pressure, which is looking at density of population and park access, acres per 1,000 people, and really evaluating kind of the quality of those parks. And what they found is that about 80% of the parks in LA County are either in fair or poor condition. And again, a significant portion of county residents actually don't have access. The map that you see on your screen really highlights the findings of the needs assessment. It shows the red and orange areas as high and very high need areas within the county. Those are also, again, correlates with race and income. So what we have, and kind of through this process of developing this needs assessment, ultimately is a work plan for all of us to think about how and where to direct funding, this public funding, to make sure that it gets to communities that needs it most. I'm going to talk quickly about kind of what that looks like, and this is a lot of information in a short period of time, so you can go to the LA County Park Needs Assessment website as well. Needs assessment done, we fast forward, we actually get a funding measure passed, $90 million a year to a county that has 88 cities, again, very populated county, not enough money, there's extreme need in some communities, and so how do you make sure that that money actually gets to the places it needs to go? So there was a steering committee that was developed through the county parks and open space district. They developed the steering committee, and basically the steering committee recommendations were, and that included many people around this table, you need to have technical assistance, you need to make sure that communities that actually need the funds have the skills to actually go after competitive grant programs and actually implement projects. And that's from the very beginning, engagement, all the way through project completion. You also need to make sure that there are kind of a baseline for engagement, community engagement. Social media does not count as community engagement. City council meetings does not count as community engagement, kind of standard practices that many cities use. So this is not getting to the type of engagement that I think Hannah was talking about, but this is at least a baseline and kind of a push and improvement in terms of how we think about engagement. So the technical assistance program is still being developed, but it again is really there to help make sure that those communities that have struggled to access funds can now get to a place where they can actually apply for grants and successfully bring those funds into their community. I would say it's not perfect, it's a good first step. We feel that in general with the needs assessment and with the funding measure that not enough money is getting into the high and very high need communities. The engagement process is not as robust as we'd like it to see, and we're still waiting to see the technical assistance program. And I'll leave it there. Oh, I get to talk about one more thing before I pass it on. So, so kind of segueing that conversation into parks and why park advocates should really care about displacement. And I feel like probably everybody already knows about that, and so I'm really preaching to the choir here. But I would just say that I think the days of thinking about, and Hannah talked about this, the days of thinking about just a park in isolation are done. So we are a parks and garden organization, but we really care about parks, housing, transportation. We need to think about how parks fit into the broader community in terms of climate, in terms of health, which is directly related to climate and connected to climate, and kind of all of the pieces. And I think what has gotten us into, especially now in Los Angeles, as we look at kind extreme housing crisis, not enough land for housing or parks, how do we really work together to make sure that we are thinking in a very strategic, kind of out-of-the-box way about bringing in these improvements to really benefit the communities? And we know that ultimately, our goal, the park advocates' goals are directly in line with the housing advocates' goals, and that we have kind of worked on our own for too long, and that it's really time to come together and think strategically, especially here in California and LA County, where we have a lot of funding that's either parks and housing. How can we really leverage it, pull it together, and have maximum impact? And so I'm going to stop there to give, I think, Sissy a turn to talk about the displacement avoidance policy.
Okay, so again, we're working with park agencies. They don't build housing, so what can they actually do? The slide that you have is actually 4 different public agencies, none of which build housing, but we've been working with them to figure out different strategies for addressing the displacement crisis, right, and the affordable housing crisis in the city. So County Department of Parks and Rec, we're talking about aligning acquisition strategies, for future parks so that we can kind of, again, facilitate an enabling environment for joint development. With the open space district, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we're going to talk about like some funding strategies for addressing the issue. Metro is our transportation authority. Our partners are doing a number of different things, including joint development and a loan fund. And then Public Works is the newest partner that we've been working on. We just got them to agree to push for an LA River affordable housing land bank. Public Works has money, but they have no land. But money is important, right? So we're still figuring out the details. But I'm gonna just kind of scroll a couple slides over and then talk specifically around Measure A, which is the Regional Parks and Open Space District. So the Open Space District is the one that's gonna be managing the park bonds. And so it does a number of different things in the slide. Sorry, we're having a little bit of tech issues.
Delays. On the next one?
Yeah, the next one. Okay, so I know that this is a lot of text. We didn't have a lot of time to edit, so apologies. But essentially what it says is, we were able to, again, this is a park bond, so we can't use it for housing, right? And so what could we do with it? And so we were really trying to get creative about things that the open space district could do without engaging in mission drift that would get them in trouble with county council. And so we looked at the scoring criteria, right? Like, how do we impact the scoring criteria to incentivize displacement avoidance? And so some of the things we did was to look at, for example, how about giving additional points to projects that are located in cities where there's already tenant protections like rent control and just cause eviction? How do we, giving additional points for projects that are a collaboration between park and affordable housing developers? Establishing a technical assistance program that includes, tenants' rights information. So for example, if you're gonna be doing community outreach, what if you also included some flyers around, rent control laws? And then data collection, right? How do you track to make sure that the park investments not only are increasing park equity, but also not having an adverse impact on housing stability? And then, of course, establishing a task force. Again, this is a park entity. They don't know about housing, so we needed a task force to provide them with the support to be able to implement these policies properly. And then the last piece is allowing Measure A funds to be used for relocation costs if a project results in the displacement of a person or a business. And so I'm going to hand it over to Natalie to talk about the joint development.
Okay, trying to find myself. Okay. All right, so I'm not sure how we're doing on time, so I'm just going to try and be fast. We can't see the timekeeper. But hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Zappella. I'm with Enterprise Community Partners and excited to be here with these great people today and with all of you. On the next slide, you will see kind of the premise that we're thinking of for joint development. So What we mean by joint development is when there's a formal arrangement between a conservancy or other park entity, which could be a park public agency or a private park developer partner, and other community partners like affordable housing developers, but we think community-based organizations are critical to this as well, to share different capital costs of a development, as in traditional joint ventures, that will realize mutual benefits for each partner and the broader community. So these are some of the categories on the left in yellow that those benefits fall into, and the next slide will show you a little bit more in detail of the examples that we're kind of coming to through our work with the La Rosa Collaborative and the pilot projects we're supporting. So in terms of social equity, health and resilience, and social capital, this joint development model really addresses the 3 Ps of affordable housing. Preservation is really essential when you look at the existing affordable housing stock in a neighborhood when there's a park development, production and protection of housing, so the displacement avoidance work. It increases access to open and spaces, cultural spaces in a community with local community participation in that, which is really critical when you look at the park needs assessment that Tori talked about. So really focusing in those areas, and then having affordable housing on site increases the kind of eyes on the park and that kind of Jane Jacobs, kind of framework, but in a park space instead of on the street, and really allows for a lot more engagement in park activities and benefits that can really be a champion of social capital. In terms of economic efficiency, there's a lot of things. One of the key kind of benefits we're finding is that conservancies and many park entities can hold land tax-free. So when you think about land acquisition, this could really help affordable housing developers not have to pay for the land holding costs while they're arranging permitting and their financing. If they share in the land acquisition costs, that certainly increases or decreases the cost for each partner, and also increases price certainty for an affordable housing partner if they were to purchase a subsection or a subdivision of a park space. And then the long-term ground lease arrangement with an affordable housing development can equal really necessary financing for the park space for operations and maintenance. So those are some of the key economic efficiencies we've seen. And then in terms of political and administrative feasibility, the conservancies are exempt from the Subdivision Map Act, and some of that is also for regional or park local government bodies. The land swaps are also really easy between different state agencies. So we have a current pilot project that you'll see later where Caltrans at the state owns a big parcel that is right near a freeway and affordable housing development, and so there may be an opportunity to, and then just to move on, it also, I talk a little bit about that, and then just the coordination of public funding in a community, and that coordination is huge. So next slide. I'm not going to talk a lot about these, but these are 5 different land use typologies we've identified for parks and housing joint development through a national scan, and we detail this pretty deeply in a report that you'll see later. I'll show a few quick examples on the next slide. So this is one in San Diego area. You can see the park development with a creek and then a lot of recreation space on the other side. This is 188 affordable apartments and a 4-acre park. On the next slide, you'll see that there's a lot of collaboration that went into this project and a lot of different funding sources. So it is a difficult process when funding isn't aligned, but this was a really great effort with grassroots community partners being involved and a really mission-aligned affordable housing developer. On the next slide, you'll see another project that's here that actually won some of the cap and trade funding, and this is so off-site greening with an affordable housing development. So they're installing a lot of trees along a major street. On the next slide is just a quick, another thing that we're working on is we did a land use study across LA County of our joint development framework and these land use typologies, and we also brought in consideration of different community needs, so like the park equity, access to transportation, and where there's the most vulnerability for climate in a community. So this is going to be a really helpful tool for land use planning in these communities. And on the next slide, we are also working on supporting several pilot projects. This is one of the ones I was talking about. And so north of the green space, you'll see that there's an empty parcel, which is what Caltrans owns. And but this is an affordable housing project that is using shipping containers and has a publicly accessible park space and a shared street, paseo is what they're calling it, that will be open up to the broader neighborhood, which is really park poor. And it's also connected to a really exciting kind of trail project that the council district is leading. So a lot of information in a short time, but we can, on the next slide, you can see more in our report, and we're here to help with any questions.
That was awesome. I think, Nick, can you unmute?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so I was saying y'all are really rock stars. I know I personally have a bunch of questions, but I'm gonna maybe we can go around to the different rooms to see what people are coming up with, or what questions are really coming up for people. And I saw a couple folks taking pictures. I saw a couple people taking pictures of the slides. So just so you know, we will be sharing the slides after this and all of the materials, so you have that as well. If Natalie and Sissy and Tori are open to more conversation, if we don't get to ask all of the questions, then hopefully we can have a space for any follow-up after. And we also have the park equity call, so we would welcome you to join those where we can talk more about some of these questions as well. So I see one hand already. I'm gonna start down at the end of the table with Suzanne Barnes from the Partnership for Southern Equity on her first question, and then I'll go around to the other rooms.
If we can, yep.
Mind passing that down. Thank you. I'm curious for the LA team, given the work that is happening in the San Francisco Bay Area now around legislation for community opportunity to purchase, if this is something that y'all looked at in your LA work. You know, I think the core idea here is that as parks investments are being made, if there are mechanisms in place to provide a sort of right of first refusal, right of first offer for community-based nonprofits in the surrounding parcels, then that puts a bit of a brake on the speculation that is sure to come. So I know this is very new work that's happening in San Francisco, but would be curious if LA or other cities for that matter have looked into that type of legislation.
Hold on, I gotta unmute LA. Apologies, 1 second. Go ahead.
In California, we have a Surplus Land Act policy that there is first right of refusal for any publicly owned land that is going to be put on the market. I personally haven't been following the Bay Area stuff just because it's you know, new but we are looking at similar strategies, so appreciate the tip. We are certainly coordinating with them on a lot of our policy work. But that's all I can share on that. If others have anything.
I think for at least the context of our organization, our communities are too poor to be home buyers.
Yeah,
you know,
that's true. Extremely
extremely low income. And I think the gap between land values versus incomes in LA are just so extreme that I think home buyer programs don't necessarily work in this context for stabilizing our communities, just because the capital isn't there for a lot of local low-income communities.
And even for the affordable housing developers, like land acquisition is such a problem, which is why we're looking at the land bank as a solution to help get land off the market faster and being held by a public agency, and then have that being sold through the Surplus Land Act to those types of nonprofit developers and partners.
I'm going to go around and try to get one question from each room first before I circle back. Chicago, is there any questions on your end?
I'm just really interested in learning more about the different land bank and whether.
We can't hear you. If you could move a little closer to the mic.
Yeah, we have a question in Chicago about hearing a little bit more about the land bank and how it works along the river.
Yeah.
So we got the Department of Public Works to agree to it a month ago. So we haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, we're working on it. One of the ways that we just had a meeting, was it yesterday already? No, it was the day before, where we brought together affordable housing developers, the conservation authorities, and the Parks District to come together with CBOs and like talk a little bit more about it. And what we realize is that one of the biggest added values to the land bank idea is to have the conservancies involved, because as a state agency, they have a lot more flexibility with working with other state agencies, and they're exempt from the Subdivision Map Act, which is going to be really essential to the ability to acquire land and then easily subdivide it, because normally, I don't know if I went into this, but normally it takes like 1.5 to 2 years for an affordable housing developer to go through that process. And when you're combining different sources of funds, it can be really difficult if the land isn't subdivided to be able to use multiple funds for different purposes. So what we're looking at and exploring is the idea of developing a joint powers authority that would include the conservancies and DPW. Thank you. There's so many. With the financial resources, and then potentially some of the Parks District, entities to be able to work together along that way. And CDC, the LA County Housing Authority or Housing Development Commission, whatever, they just changed their name too. So we're just like beginning to talk about what the structure could look like, but we think that there's a really great potential value for that.
Right. And just a little background, the Department of Public Works manages a lot of public infrastructure, specifically storm drains, sewers. They don't actually have a lot of land, but they are a revenue generating entity. So the idea could be that they wouldn't necessarily be holding the land or owning the land, but they could be the purchaser that allows for and is a source of patient capital. Mm-hmm. But again, this is still super early in the process, so we're still figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
And we will be right here to ask you questions when you do. And so I'm gonna go next to Pittsburgh.
We're wondering a little bit about the structure of La Rosa and its collaboration. Is it do you have a staff? Are there monthly meetings? If you could get a little bit more of that, that'd be helpful.
Do you want to do it, or do you want me to?
I can do it.
Okay.
We just completed a strategic planning process and are we're in the process of adopting a governance structure that will outline, meetings, leadership roles, that kind of stuff. Previously, we were kind of operating informally with monthly meetings and then ad hoc meetings in between different partners and agencies. Just like, for example, the capital team, the folks working on the capital investment side would meet separately from the entire coalition to talk about, different funding strategies, for example, and same with policy. We are an unfunded collaborative, so it's largely been people who are at the table because they are committed to solving this issue, but we are looking for funds to hire staff to help support participation between all the different partners.
Great. Any questions from Denver?
I'm trying to unmute them. Okay, you're unmuted.
Hi there. This is Dana, one of the participants in the room. I'm familiar with some of the more conservation-forward partnerships around the LA River, like Amigos de los Rios, the Urban Waters Federal Partnership. There's the U.S. Forest Service and city-led Center for Urban Natural Resources Sustainability. I'm curious if those are partners or bad guys in this kind of bringing together open space and nature and affordable housing conversation.
So
we're not
some
even
of
on
the-
your radar, who knows?
No, it's totally fine. So some of the organizations that are members of La Rosa are also in those, in that room as well for those different partnerships. But it's a handful of people. You know, there's a couple different things. One is some of the environmentalists that we've talked to, you know, see that this is an issue but don't have the capacity or the interest or, you know, the ability to participate in La Rosa. The other thing that we also kind of decided to do like a year ago was to close off membership temporarily while we figure out governance structure. Because there were a lot of people who wanted to join La Rosa for the explicit purpose of learning about the issue. But we don't have, you know, we're unfunded, we don't have staff, so we don't have the capacity to get work done and to teach, you know, environmentalists about how they can engage in these issues. And so we are in conversations with them. They are not bad guys, we don't hate them. I think we're just trying to figure out, like, how can we move forward on the work and share our learnings and not kill ourselves with too much other things going on.
Yeah, just to add, one of the things, like Sissy said, we did kind of close off our membership while we were going through strategic planning, and it was really intense, but it was great. And so now we're planning to have, because there's so many different public entities in the LA area, we're planning to have some one-on-one meetings with several different departments coming together to share more about what we're doing and talk about what a partnership and coordination should look like. And then we're gonna, after that, host a building partnerships event where we'll kind of bring it to the general public and a lot of our other partners. And we're developing a request for qualifications or interest or something. We're still figuring out what we're gonna call it, but just a way for people to kind of know if they wanna get involved and if so, how they can contribute. But we're really looking more for like sweat equity contribution and thought partnership.
Perfect. And I'm gonna go to Memphis to ask our last question. We can't hear you if you did ask a question.
You started to, I think, and then.
I don't think we have a question at this point.
No, you guys are good. We can hear you. Great. Sorry, never mind.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So that might actually work out because our the next portion of what we're gonna do for probably the next 40 minutes or so is to break out into pairs of groups. And when I say pairs, really, I just mean break out across the region. So for example, Atlanta and Chicago are gonna have a conversation. Los Angeles and Memphis are gonna have a conversation. And Denver and Pittsburgh are gonna have a conversation. And then we're gonna pair that with some of the National SPARCC partners who are all across and in the room. And so what the purpose of is to really share the work that we all are working on. I think we try to pair regions who might be doing something similar or who could probably do some learning and sharing with each other. So we'll reflect on what we heard from LA. I know there was a couple questions that we had in the room. Maybe we can bring it back into the discussion now and to share maybe a key challenge that we're being faced with in the region. So the local facilitators will help to guide the discussion in each of the rooms. And then after we have kind of the peer sharing, we'll then go back and just talk to our own regions before we come back in around all of the different rooms and ask about the conversations that you had, but more specifically, what does success look like for your region? And what is it gonna take to really advance this work? And so each room has about 6 minutes to really respond to that. I'm gonna hold off on Atlanta and maybe we can figure out here. Yeah, each room has about 6 minutes to share. And then maybe when I come back to Atlanta, we can close out and then I can head to Odetta. So
We will not do that to you.
I'm gonna start with Pittsburgh.
They actually just had to sign off, Sasha. So you can choose another one.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So I'll start with Denver.
Great. I like stretching. So we had a really deep conversation towards the end of our time and really thinking about equity and how equity shows up in every aspect of it. And really that we're being intentional and that we're being thoughtful about decisions that are being made in our communities. And so success to us really looks like putting people in the room that are deeply affected and that are the ones that are essentially the receiving end, not necessarily on the back end, but on the front end. So really taking, I think, a lot of the lessons learned that we talked about, or the lessons learned and things that were highlighted from Los Angeles. And that the decisions really need to be informed by multiple voices and multiple representation, not just the nonprofits shouting equity, 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 but the community residents that are ultimately affected by the decisions that are made at tables when it comes to development and when it comes to the work. We did start to think about opportunities for us to collaborate. We have so many different geographies that are being represented in the room. So we really started to think about, well, what does collaboration look like across the SPARCC sites? And so we're really interested in learning more, obviously, from Los Angeles and that highlighted tool. But I think even Atlanta and some of the work that they're doing in the Beltline for our suburban communities that are also kind of on the receiving end, getting their insight into what we could do to maybe be a little bit more proactive. We're trying our best on the ground to be proactive and learn what's happening in Denver and how can we mitigate that in other communities, but how do we learn from our other SPARCC sites as well? I think I captured most of what we talked about. I'm going to ask my group if there's anything else that I might be missing. All right. That's it for Denver.
Wonderful. So next, let's go to Chicago.
Okay, I'm trying to hit on mute. I don't know why it's not going.
Should we mute ourselves here?
No, I'll get you. There we go. Chicago's unmuted.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. So our room really became energized around the conversation with Equitable TOD through the SPARCC funding and grant. Now that we've come to about 3 years after the initiative was first launched, to sort of reflect back on whether or not we could have done better in bringing parks into the conversation, since here in Chicago we have seen you know, an immediate inequitable outcome that took place on a segment of a well-intentioned community investment noted as the 606 Bloomingdale Trail, as we've talked about in the past, and sort of seeing the parallel in discussions as we see that transit, as its also intention was to increase mobility, particularly for low-income, poor communities. But as a result, we've also seen that it's very desirable to live close to station areas. So we wanted to get into the discussion and see if there's going to be, you know, another round of funding for this particular grant in the city of Chicago to see, you know, what are some tangible ways that we can really elevate, so to speak, the park discussion with the right representation in the room. And if folks, due to politics or whatever other issues are taking place from neighborhood to neighborhood, that it's still upon the community hubs within each of those 7, I believe it's 7, right? ETOD areas that fully captures and engages park advisory councils. And the reason why we're seeing this as a solution is because we've already had so much energy around coalition building and resources placed around developing a stronger equitable development framework in relationship to transit, and we want to be able to see that extend into parks. Most recently, we saw community engagement strategies that came out of the SPARCC ETOD initiative, and that is something that we know that's being elevated through public engagement with the new mayor's office. So we are seeing the power that is being transferred from the community grassroots level with philanthropy and non-for-profits involved, and now being translated higher up into elected official offices. So we really want to be able to capture on this energy right now and ensure that that parks are a fundamental part of that discussion, and really quickly also see how we can further investigate different partnerships where community liaisons are paid to participate. As we're all well aware, folks are stretched, and it isn't really a fair ask to expect to continue to have that engagement in the room without something that can help out in terms of funding for those folks. So did I capture?
Yes, absolutely. We need to pay people for their time.
Yep.
Yeah, true. With that, I'm gonna go over to Memphis.
One second, I'm unmuting you. The Zoom is being so slow at unmuting for some reason. Can you guys unmute on your end?
It's an unzoom.
How about now?
There we go. All right, okay.
Okay, great, thanks. So we had some good discussions here about kind of a lot of different things. I'll try and thread them together. I think that success looks like first we identified people talking, like actually people talking for themselves and not relying on organizations or the typical strategy of like a professional trying to say what the community issues are and what the needs are, but actually getting those people in those neighborhoods and communities to attend these meetings and speak amongst that. And then getting those people in those positions to talk about those issues or be a part of the brainstorming, getting to talk with different organizations and that are of a higher level. So kind of we're all from different organizations here, making sure that we are able to learn from each other as well and that we're still listening to each other, and how we can sort of continue our relationships to support each of the next phases that our organizations are contributing to, and making sure that our commitment to ultimately why we're doing these projects remains true, which is have the people be at the center of it. And so I guess like holding each other accountable to that and how we can be of support to each other.
Thank you. Thank you. Heading over to LA.
Hey everyone, can you hear us?
Yes.
Great. So a couple of the key successes we felt is one big thing is the coordination of the different groups that are working on these things. So there's La Rosa, but then there's a handful of other coalitions and organizations and entities working on like park equity and then equity more broadly. And success would definitely be the communication among them and like developing a like comprehensive strategy and working towards that together. And then also a big thing is a narrative change on what parks can and can't be. So stuff around basically parks as a resource to help mitigate many of the other ills that are plaguing our city and as well as others. And then in terms of some next steps that we can take, I think it is like having these meetings and conversations with the different people who are involved in all of this work and being able to compensate for their time, just as the previous speakers have been talking about, and making sure that equity is at the forefront and we're making more coalitions and more meetings, unfortunately. But productive meetings and coalitions.
Absolutely. So I would have loved to be able to get the national team in there and some of maybe the collective things that we heard across the room. I don't see you on the screen right now, but I know we're somewhere in between DC and the Bay Area. But given the time, what I'm gonna probably do is say maybe we save our what we can collectively do. I don't know if Stephanie's there or had like a quick comment, but what we can collectively do for the park equity meeting next month when we all come back together. So what I'm gonna do now is maybe shift over to Atlanta, and then Odetta will close us out. But I would just like to quickly say, we talked about a lot of things today, but also things felt like we're leaving a lot open as well. And so just making sure that we know that this is a conversation we hope to continue, to not just really uncover some of the issues, but really figure out how we deal with the solutions as well, and moving it forward. So I'm gonna go.
Yeah, well, I was really just teasing. I wasn't meaning to put you on the hot spot, but if you would like to say something,
okay.
As we wrap that, I'd be happy to have your perspective as you step into the role. Or yeah, he will need the mic to do that.
Give you the mic.
Yeah, I think we're hitting on all cylinders here in Atlanta in terms of everything that has been part of the conversation. We've got some great projects that are going right now: West Side Park, Cook Park, Katherine Johnston Park, that really has required us to work across agencies, from Watershed to Invest Atlanta to Park Pride, to flooding resolutions and green infrastructure, and then Invest Atlanta as well, to acquire properties along Memorial Drive Greenway project with Oakland Cemetery and Invest Atlanta, and the as well as the foundations of those organizations, and then continue to acquire land over at Piedmont Park and working with the Botanical Gardens. So all those things are going to require what I've called, the C3, the cooperate, collaborate, and communicate on each one of these and how they impact agencies as well as those neighborhood groups that we're a part of. The big thing for us, our big move is we're going to be working in the next, starting in about 3 months, is a comprehensive Parks and Recreation Master Plan. We've done project green space plans that really looked at parks only, but then now it's looking comprehensively, all these plans that we're talking about, this from the city plan design to these other site plans and master plans and Beltline plans, is then this comprehensive Parks and Recreation Master Plan will look at all those, and how does this fit into the big picture of City of Atlanta in terms of parks and open space, but also the recreation component of it. And then that last chapter is how do we maintain and sustain that moving forward, that complements all these plans moving forward. And that I agree, there's that the city plan design goes for everything from environmental to economics to affordability to historical. We've got to keep those things in perspective as well, in terms of where we've come from, where are we now, and what are we going to look like in the future, and what does parks and open space look like there too. So this is going to be a huge piece for us to put together, first time ever, a comprehensive parks and recreation master plan, but then make it actionable, keep it off the shelf and keep working towards it. And it takes a village, as you know, to make that happen. So we've got some great components here that are, I've been in Parks and Recreation for 25 years. And here in Atlanta, we've got really good bones and a willingness and a desire and a passion to make a difference in people's lives. And I think that's sort of that foundation to get us where we need to be in the next level. I hope that wraps it up. Yeah.
We're all having our tech fun today. Great, thank you. So I appreciate so much the chance to kind of officially close this out, and I'll just do this so I don't look like I'm sort of off to the side somewhere. I think collaboration, conversation, Transformation Alliance has been a place where we've been trying to practice all that partnership and a deeper level of communication with folks. So hearing that there's a master Parks and Rec plan coming up, everyone in this room, Transformation Alliance and other members that are not in the room today would love to, support that work and make sure that some of the systems and history that take those great intentions away from what we hope can step into play. But among your assets are groups like Transformation Alliance and our members who are really explicit and honest about kind of where the pain points are, what the history has been, and where we're nervous about what could go or not go the way we all intend it to, for everyone to thrive. I want to thank everyone for participating in this first ever virtual learning conversation. It was, as SPARCC always does, complex, multi-level, learning on all sorts of levels and trying new things. So thank you for your patience. I want to thank Hannah and everyone in Los Angeles for presenting amazing frames, great research, and wonderful outcomes from your work. So inspiring and really gives us some stuff to look at. I'm not sure we do joint development in Atlanta. Am I just not aware of specific parks and housing joint development? I mean, that's the kind of thing that housing and transit is where we have done it most. Okay, great. So I have been tasked to remind everybody, please fill out an evaluation. These kinds of moments will only get better if we hear what worked and what didn't work. We are trying to find lower cost ways to talk between the sites and the regions of SPARCC. So somewhere in your room, there should be an evaluation, and if you would fill it out before you go, that would be amazing. We will have the recording from today to share, and looks like we're going to put it into some different pieces, but we'll let Nick handle that. And of course, share presentations and materials that our speakers are willing to share with us. I think that is